Hi everyone! Today I am going to be analyzing a heartbreaking scene from the television series Peaky Blinders, written by Stephen Knight. The series has gained quite a bit of popularity within the last few years on Netflix, and I will be focusing on Grace's fateful death in the devastating series episode. So, here we go. So it's important for us to recognize who the Peaky Blinders are, what the show is. So the Peaky Blinders is a dark, intriguing crime drama set in the brutal aftermath of World War One. So it's beginning in 1919 Birmingham, England, a city that was dealing with heavy pollution, poverty, and disturbance, and soldiers who recently fought in France in the war and are suffering through PTSD. So at the time, Britain is incredibly fractured, the working class is exploited, and political extremism is coming to a head. Out of this instability comes the Peaky Blinders, a feared street gang led by the Shelby family. They're named for their signature look, so they wear sharp suits and they have these flat caps, rumored to be lined with razor blades, and these are actually used to cut out the eyes of their enemies. So they're not just petty criminals, they are incredibly organized gangs that control illegal betting, smuggling, racketeering, and later develop legitimate businesses as well. So at the center is Thomas Shelby. He's a highly intelligent, emotionally scarred war veteran whose tactical brilliance and emotional detachment make him both compelling and terrifying at the same time. So what begins as a small-time betting operation quickly evolves into something far more sinister and dangerous. The Shelbys exploit chaos, intimidation, and strategic alliances to expand their power beyond Birmingham, England, and they actually bring this into the United States, into New York as well. As their influence grows, they clash with many rival gangs, corrupt police, and eventually the British government itself, including levels of the mafia as well. Each season raises the stakes. There's issues with firearm trafficking, political assassinations, increased labor strikes, and dealing with international crime syndicates. So this actually all pulls the Peaky Blinders deeper into a world where their own survival depends on how ruthless they are towards other human beings. And they get very, very ruthless. On the night Grace is killed, the Shelby family is celebrating gang leader Thomas's marriage to Grace, and the family briefly lets their guard down in the wake of the excitement. The attack is not intentionally aimed at Grace, and instead the assassination attempt is meant for Tommy, orchestrated by enemies seeking revenge for earlier betrayals and power struggles. Grace is shot while standing beside him, symbolizing how deeply violence has embedded itself into Tommy's life. Now that we have established some general background for us, it's time for us to apply integral concepts regarding the media literacy discourse model. We are going to explore authors and audiences, messages and meanings, and representations and realities. So, to start, we are going to address authors and audiences. So, our first question asks, what can we infer about the author, purpose, and target audience? So, this scene reflects pretty heavily the creative intentions of the show's writer, particularly Stephen Knight, because he's very known for crafting these complex narratives that are a little bit harder to break down morally. So the author presents violence not as entertainment alone, but honestly as a consequence of Tommy Shelby's choices. So Grace is an incredibly innocent, stabilizing presence in the film, and the author signals a rejection of this romanticized kind of crime storytelling because crime should not be romanticized, and oftentimes it ends up in violence and ends up in people dying. So I think that's what the author is trying to do with this. So it disrupts the illusion of safety and redemption as well. So that's also kind of the purpose of this death of Grace. There is no safety. So they were in the middle of a wedding celebration, and as a viewer, it kind of looks like a turning point for Thomas Shelby. He looks like he's going to start prioritizing his family and letting go of these ties to the mafia and to all these higher ups that are causing him issues and violence in his life. So it's a very brief moment when everybody lets their guard down, and that's why it's so devastating when Grace dies. On a broader level, the scene kind of warns audiences about the unavoidable consequences of living with systems of violence. You cannot avoid it, and I think Thomas Shelby tries for a very long time to coexist as a good father and a good husband, all while running this crime ring, and it just doesn't work like that. It's inevitable that something bad is going to happen. And this scene is obviously intended for mature adult audiences that are capable of engaging with these emotionally intense kind of scenes. I was 20 years old when I saw it, and I still could not watch this scene with a straight face. It was kind of debilitating to everybody who loves the show. Grace was definitely an unintended victim, and it allows us to kind of understand these themes of trauma, loss, and ethical ambiguity. And then the scene also just targets critical reflections on violence, masculinity, and the aftermath of power. So now we transform into our messages and meanings section. So in the scene of Grace's death, Peaky Blinders uses several production techniques to construct its message. So initially, we notice right off the bat the cinematography and lighting. It creates this immense tension throughout these shadows and these close-ups and these loud gunshots and the intense music. It kind of highlights that fear and grief, and it makes everything that much more real when you're watching it. Editing and pacing as well kind of contrast with Tommy's chaotic energy. He's a very fast-paced man. He thinks on his toes. He gets things done. So I think the editing and pacing kind of helps us follow along with that. And then costume and setting as well. So formal wedding attire is often worn. They're always dressed very, very spiffy with their razor-bladed caps on. So it kind of just shows that formal attire and what life was like in 1919 Birmingham, England, for people specifically in power, like the Shelby family. So not everybody was walking around dressed to the nines. It certainly was just this family that was in power. The message highlights this inevitability of consequences living in such a violent world. So again, it's inevitable. You cannot escape the consequences of dealing with such a violent life. It reflects the ideology that power can be gained through crime, but it does come at a personal cost. So he's now lost his wife, and it was at a cost of doing all this dirty business. It values loyalty, family, and ambition. It shows their strength and their fragility, so two sides of a coin. The point of view also emphasizes moral complexity. So Tommy is portrayed as this very incredibly sympathetic man who won medals in the war and loved his wife wholeheartedly, but then it also reinforces the idea that personal happiness and contentness is sacrifice when it comes to systemic violence. So he lost to the violence. He can't really show that happiness, that personal happiness, because he's lost it to this violent lifestyle. In addition to the violent lifestyle comes social inequalities and political instability throughout this time period, which again was 1919 Birmingham, England, post-war. So it was not a good situation. The scene of Grace's death affects viewers' knowledge, attitudes, and behavior by showing the real consequences of violence and crime. Personal lives are shaped by power, trauma, and social instability. So all three of these things together. It shapes attitudes by emphasizing the emotional and ethical costs of ambition and loyalty, provoking empathy and reflection. So there are ethical costs to doing this type of business, and that shows. It doesn't dictate actions. It encourages audiences to critically question these crime narratives and kind of recognize that this isn't safe. This isn't to be glamorized. This is a very scary thing, and it does happen in real life, unfortunately. And lastly, we move on to our section of representations and realities. And this scene is certainly a selective portrayal of the dangers of criminal life. It certainly focuses on the emotional and personal consequences of violence rather than that broader social and economic factors that affect the ordinary people. So it certainly emphasizes Tommy Shelby's worlds of power, loyalty, and trauma, but nobody else's. It presents a very heightened, almost dramatized version of post-World War I Birmingham, where these gang leaders were running around collecting money and everybody was afraid of them. That certainly isn't a correct portrayal of the reality at the time, and it wasn't that easy for everybody. Stereotypes of the violent masculine gangster versus the innocent moralizing woman, which was Grace, kind of shapes the audience understanding of characters and consequences. The narrative structure was also kind of shaped so it built tension during this wedding, and then it culminated in this sudden tragedy of her death. So it was kind of reinforcing the idea that violence is inevitable. And lastly, the show uses historical context, detailed production design, and realistic character development to enhance the credibility of World War I Birmingham during this time period. We move on to our concept section and how we can relate this to what we just learned in this presentation. So our first concept is the idea of why media is important to individuals in society. And this was discussed early, I believe, in chapter 1 or chapter 2. So it provides storytelling across generations. So throughout history, we have tended to express and share ourselves and our experiences through this thing called storytelling. So passing down knowledge of lived lives and cultures before us. And it's actually amongst one of the oldest forms of cultural expression. So it plays a very significant role in the way we interact and thrive on a day-to-day basis. And we can't really thrive in any society without not only learning from direct experience, but also the wisdom of the community around us. We need to be open to accepting these things. So, in this sense, education can be seen as a very formal process of absorbing those discoveries of those previous generations, like I said. And throughout the media, we've learned in this class, we inherit the insights and lessons of those who came before us. And so, as Vanderbes notes in 2013, when storytellers use ornament and plumage to draw attention to their tales, they inevitably draw eyes themselves. So, this is actually a direct quote from our textbook that was written by Dr. Renee Hobbs, our lovely professor. And storytelling also enhances this idea of critical thinking. In addition to this, psychology refers to counterfactual thinking, the ability to imagine alternatives to past events, exploring what if scenarios. So we refer to counterfactual thinking as exploring what if scenarios. Our concept number 2 is the word affect we are going to be focusing on. So people use media to experience feelings. This is what affects mean. We use media to experience feelings. So using media to arouse emotions such as happiness, fear, excitement, and even honestly, sometimes horror provides a form of pleasure. So we wonder why some of us tend to like horror movies. Even if it's fear, it still provides that sense of pleasure. So watching a beloved character be murdered throughout this Peaky Blinders series with a bullet meant for her husband, Thomas Shelby, was absolutely heartbreaking. However, we watch these types of shows to experience feelings and true emotions like fear and horror. They are essential to our development. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch and view my screencast.
Created using Powtoon.